1994, I switched and went from a single species cover to a dual species cover. Ended up with a reddish that was 6 inches in diameter and 36 inches long. Took it to the Soil and Water Office to brag. They took my picture, and then it made me a speaker for some reason, you know. And I'm not a speaker, I'm a farmer, so some of the things might not sound very well from where I go from here. They wanted me to talk about my journey, and I began in 1971 with an Alice Chalmers planter, mainly because I just got back from Vietnam. I was milking cows that I started as a small herd. My dad was involved. He was involved in a tractor accident that killed him. Of course, we had, at that point, Dad didn't have a will, and I had an older sister. She come home to the funeral and she says, "I want my third, David," and that forced the sale of that farm. So we lost everything right after we got started milking cows. Was able to go to a tenant farm, and we bought a AC planter, a John Deere 45 combine without a cab, a 720 John Deere, and a 300-gallon sprayer. And that was my equipment lineup, you know. I never done no-till before, and we got started. And I want to talk a little about the journey. So with our AC planter, we started working with it and trying to figure out how much horsepower it took, you know, and then we got to going out to talking to places. And everybody says, well, how much horsepower does it take to pull an AC planter? So it's real simple. A 2-row takes 4 horsepower, you know. 6-row will take 8 horsepower, you know. That's what you want to do. But what we were doing was learning, you know, and we learned by doing. I've probably made more mistakes than most of you, you know, because we just didn't have any mentors back then, you know. When we started in '71, our herbicide program, it wasn't a problem. There was only 3 things: atrazine, 2,4-D, and more atrazine, you know. It wasn't uncommon to use 6 pounds of atrazine to kill the weeds, you know. A little bit of 2,4-D in there. Then in about 72, 73, paraquat came on the system. Then we began to learn a little bit about using burn downs. We learned not to use pond water because it usually had clay particles from the erosion, neutralized the paraquat, so that didn't work. You know, so we learned that lesson. We started with an old, I guess what I'm trying to tell you, you know, we have guidance now. We don't have a piece of corn planter or drill equipment that you can't use in no-till. You know, in '71, everything was conventional. An old 494 corn planter, you know, a lightweight planter that planted in the clods, did a pretty decent job. They wasn't heavy enough for no-till. So we got that AC planter. We found this zip seeder. But I really put this picture in to show you that we're like around here. We farm 1,100 acres. 855 acres of it is high erodible. We go from 0 to 6% slope in our flat fields and our most slopes. In that 22% sloping field, you always shell the corn with the auger sticking out full of corn. Makes you feel a little better, you know. So here we're doing our first pasture improvement. I just wanted to show you our terrain. Looks like we've come a long way. When you think about the John Great Plains drills and all those that we see today, you know. So for 20 years we used single species. In '94 we figured out we could do something different. So we went using 2 species. We started mixing winter peas and crimson clover in a corn planter in 15-inch rows, you know. This is a picture of one of those fields. I really like this because it eliminated a lot of my expense. This cover crop cost me $17 an acre. It gave me 1 pound of reddish, 14 pounds of winter peas. You know, the reddish became my tillage tool. We did lots of things with that. Our main cover crop early in the years has been rye, and we're still high on rye. We like rye on our farm, mainly because rye is the most economical thing we can grow as a cover. It will suppress all the winter annuals. It will suppress some mare's tail and some giant ragweeds. And it has the largest diverse window to plant into. We can plant rye in August. On our farm, we can plant rye on Thanksgiving Day and still see things happening. The reason I'm going to have to sit down is I had a knee replacement 3 weeks ago, and my back's telling me I need to find a chair, so pardon for me for that. But we really like the rye. My wife and I run 1,150 acres. She is really good. She's about 5'4". Our no-till drill is a Kraus drill. The seed box is 6 foot off the ground. It holds 94 bags of rye. They weigh 54 pounds apiece. She's good for 2 fill-ups, you know. We can get about 120 acres out of her. After that, she's got smart, you know. The rest of the 1,000 acres we have to put cover crop on. She puts it in a fertilizer spreader with about 50 pounds of potash and spreads it. That's what I wanted to show you here. This is rye that was spread at 40 pounds the acre with 50 pounds of potash. Not worked in, just laid on the surface in the fall before, and now we're planting soybeans. So it doesn't seem to matter how you get that cover crop out there, it'll grow, you know. The best thing I can do is figure out how to do it, you know. We saw it here in April the 28th. It started to rain once we started planting. So we was out of the field for about 2.5 weeks. That's how much that rye grew in 2.5 weeks. That rye also, as it grew that tall, took 1 inch of rainfall out of the soil a day. You know. I'm out there standing and wondering how I'm going to do this. Now we do it like this all the time. We want it in bloom. We want it tall. We want to have as much biomass on the soil as we can have to keep it from eroding, to lower our herbicide costs, and to give us yield for soybeans. Here's the field. It's in 15-inch rows. We rolled the rye. No herbicide. The only thing we have in the upper right-hand corner is about 50 pokeberry weeds, you know. I looked at them and I thought, well, I should do something with them, so I found my hoe, give it to my wife, and she didn't get out there. You know, you can tell by looking at me, I don't use anything that don't have a motor, you know. But pretty clean, you know. And these are the kinds of things we're looking at. We've learned to reduce our seeding rates. We're down to about 115,000 seeds in soybeans now, producing 80 bushel beans, you know. But what we're after is armor on the soil, which is what we have right here. We want this rye to tie up the excess nitrogen left from the corn crop from the year before. Why do I want it to tie up that nitrogen? I want it so that the soybean, when it grows, puts more roots and more nodulation in the soil. If there's free nitrogen for the soybeans, what they do, they get tall and the node set is farther apart. If the soybean can't find free nitrogen, it puts more nodules on, puts more nodes on the plants. They're closer together. If you'll notice, there's 3 to 5 beans per node. If that was a conventional field of corn, there'd be 2 nodes, 2 pods. They'd be 6 to 7 inches apart. You know. When you look at these soybeans, each node, the soybeans are touching the next ones. These are 35, 36 inches tall. If you count these beans, there's 75 to 80 pods per plant. which means it produced about 70 bushel beans per acre. You know, this is what we like to see. Also, I should go back. Also, when we see this, with this thatch here, when we have a large rainfall event, we no longer have soil that moves. It no longer splashes up on the stems of the soybeans, or the soil gets on, it does not get on the leaves. If we don't move the soil, we no longer have sudden death. We no longer have white mold. The rye tends to help fumigate the soil, takes the soybean cyst nematode out of the situation. When we have rye like this, we don't need to worry about fungicides or insecticides for the beans. Another cost savings for David. You know, these are all things we have to consider today. I looked at a budget sheet from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. Guess what they all had in common? A bracket loss in the corn bean production side. And the bracket loss was from $125 an acre down to $40. On our farm, I cannot stand to lose $40 per acre. If I do, I won't be there very long. And I know I sure can't stand to lose $200 an acre growing corn. So we have to learn to cut those expenses. We're going to change gears a little bit and talk about cover crops as single species for corn. We plant a lot of hairy vetch after wheat. We're in a 3-year rotation on our farm, corn, soybeans, and wheat. The reason I like that, it's simple. We have a third of it in corn, the next third of it's in soybeans, the next third of it's in wheat. Guess what? It's not a problem figuring out what goes in every field. You know, David has to keep it simple. So if there was corn in the field this year, next year it'll have soybeans. In the fall when we harvest the corn, it'll have rye. If we had soybeans in the field, it automatically goes to wheat in the fall. After the wheat comes off, it automatically goes to a large cover crop, a multiple species cover crop. And we'll talk about why we like multiple species over dual species or single species. Because we can save so much more nutrients. This is 12-pound of hairy vetch after wheat. You know, pretty nice stand. Here's what it looks like. I can remember back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, everybody had shag carpet in their living room. You know, you could walk around barefooted, and the shags were 4 or 5 inches tall. Just imagine, that's like planting into hairy vetch. You know? But the vetch is about 18 or 20 inches tall. The only problem we run into planting in this, where you see that marker arm right out there, is we got to put a ball of string and a knotter assembly out there, because every 500 feet we can make a 200-pound round bale. Other than that, it's not too bad. You know, this year in 16, we no longer have markers. We got a GPS system on this. It's guidance now. That's the next step that we made to improve our production level. You know, what we really like about hairy vetch, if you'll notice, there's no mud on the closing wheels. We're able to use rubber closing wheels. For years we used cast iron. We tried spike closing wheels. Can you imagine a spike closing wheel grabs one of them hairy vetches when you don't see it? You got a 600-pound round bale behind you. You know? So we don't use them. So we get by with a minimum, because the soil underneath this hairy vetch is so granular and so fine that it's just real easy to close. You know, no problems. We like Austrian winter pea where we can't get hairy vetch in. This is 30 pounds per acre. This is about 65 cents a pound, or 21 bucks an acre. What we like about winter peas is it has a tap root. You can see the tap root that we have. We have organic in at 1.5 inches, 2 inches deep. We have lots at 4 or 5 inches deep, and we have organic in at 9 inches deep. Why do I like that? We plant corn at 1.5 inches or 2 inches deep. The first root of the corn seedling goes over there and grows right in that root. When the corn seedling opens up and the first true leaves come, they're not yellow. They're dark green. They never slow down. They keep growing. When it's knee-high and time to think about side dress, we got 150 to 100, maybe as much as 300 pound of nodulation, depends on how good the stand of the winter peas were. You know, in August, when we're thinking about test weight, there's the root of the corn, picking up nitrogen to improve test weight. For the past 5 years, we have not sold any corn off of our farm less than 60 pounds. Last fall we sold corn at 64 pounds. Do you realize what 8 pounds more in a bushel of corn mean as far as yield? That's jumping your yield by 20 bushels the acre. You know, just in test weight alone. You know. This is a tile spade. I wanted to show you how it does, how it works. Here's our topsoil line. We got about 6 inches of topsoil on our highly erodible land. This is subsoil. This is 18 inches deep. This is 9 to 27. That's when that picture was taken. This hairy vetch, or this winter pea, was sowed on August 1st after wheat. Why do we wait so long? We want to make sure our silver cedar combine leaves a little bit of wheat behind. So we use Roundup between wheat harvest time and planting a double crop, planting our cover crops. You know, we may have a little Johnson grass problems. We may have some other things. We can take it out with Roundup, have a clean area to go into. But for 37 days of growth, our plants are 18 inches deep and there's a nodulation in the subsoil. What does that mean for David? That means we may not have to buy any nitrogen. Depends on the year, you know. Here's our soils today, right here. This is Cardington clay base yellow soils. Today, that's the color of it, with 8% organic matter. Look at the nodulation. Look how it looks like cottage cheese. Look at the little fungi here. That's going to tell my corn plant to put out 200 bushel corn. We have everything we need. We like to see this situation on a spade. Look how granular this soil is, 14 inches deep. Look at that color of that soil. In 1971, this was all yellow clay. Here you can see a little bit of yellow clay left, a little bit here. We have changed that soil to 18 inches of dark soil. Water infiltration on that soil is 20 inches an hour. Before it was a ½ inch an hour before we started. Just think what that'll mean to you. You know. We've made lots of mistakes by using lots of different covers. I think we look back, we've used over 175 different cover crops in the 45 years we've been looking at cover crops. There's about 20 of them I'll never use again. And this happens to be one of them. This is called Chickling Green Fix Vetch. I really liked it when I saw it first because it grew real well. Didn't have any trouble with establishment. Earthworms did really well. There's my deep ripper. He's come out there and told me thanks a lot for having cover. But if you look in the picture down here, you see these white blooms. This is 30 days after planting. What happened? This is a nitrogen fixing crop. Do you see nitrogen nodules on this roots? Absolutely not. What it's doing, it's moved that nitrogen nodulation to make seed. On Dave Brant's farm, we want no cover to go to seed unless it's a beneficial where we're going to bring insects in, like a sunflower. So we quit using it just because it went to bloom so easy. This is a tile spade. This is a 22-inch earthworm, guys. You know. How would you like to have them? You know, I'd like to have them. That's not ours. A friend of mine in Texas called me. He's 20 years old. He was on our farm 5 years ago. He called me 3 years ago and he says, David, can you come down and talk to my dad? Dad and I's having problems. I got cover crops. Dad don't like it. He wants me to quit. Can you come talk to him? I went down to see his dad. His dad's never been in the field other than sitting on a tractor doing tillage. I took him to the field. The first shovel full was this earthworm. He'd never seen an earthworm before. He had never felt the soil. Look how granular this soil's getting. After that, we convinced his dad that this is what he needed to do. Today on this farm, they have 11,000 acres of cover. Quite remarkable. And they get 5.5 inches of rainfall a year and growing 165 bushel corn on 5.5 inches of rainfall. Our big cover crop that we like to use on first-year farms that we take over is buckwheat. Mainly because it's a shallow-rooted plant. It blooms in 30 days. If it blooms like this, I can call my Beekeepers Association, tell them they can put 10 hives per acre for 2 weeks, charge them $10 a hive, making money. Don't need to plant corn, but we do. It's only there for 45 days, you know. What happens is down here, we have a shallow root system. It's like hair on a dog, 4 inches thick. That soil no longer crusts because of the root mass. What happens with the buckwheat? The buckwheat works on phosphorus that's unavailable in the soil profile, makes about 20 pounds of it available for this year's corn crop. Another savings, so we don't have to buy phosphorus for the corn or bean crop. Persilia is a French plant that we really like. The reason I like it, it has a deep root. In 60 days, it'll be 64 inches deep in the soil. And it will bloom. It will bring beneficial insects. It makes great honey. You know, our farm, we have 3,365 beneficial insects. When we take a net and sweep for them, we only find 23 harmful insects. We have 3,000 of them that's going to eat them, so we don't need to use an insecticide. You know. This is some work that I tried to put together when we got a yield monitor in '83 to 2008. We kept looking, kept wondering how much nitrogen we needed to apply to these fields that had cover. You know. So our normal use is about 185 pounds to produce about 170 to 180 bushel corn. So here it is here. You know, the next bracket we went to 100 pounds and we didn't lose much yield. So we made the determination is that we was using about 85 pounds too much, which saves me about $60 an acre. We dropped it down to 50 and we still had our yields that was identical. So that's how we're basing how much nitrogen we're getting from our cover crops for corn. These are two watersheds that come together just south of our farm. The one on the right is partly ours. There's 3,600 acres here involved. There's about 2,200 acres involved in this one. We had a ½ inch of rain on both sides. This one is clear. You see the mud and nitrogen and the phosphorus leaving. That color of water, when we took a sample there, showed that that farms above that watershed was losing better than 5 tons of soil in that rainfall event. Very little soil was being lost on the northern side. We talked about a new dawn. The new dawn for me was when I went from a John Deere planter to a white planter. And the reason we did that was we went to a John Deere dealer and I said, I need a new corn planter. I want one that'll plant corn, soybeans, wheat, and cover crop. The dealer stood up in his chair and he laughed and he says, "Get out of my office. You can't do that." You know, I went to the Kinsey dealers, the same thing. I went to an AGCO dealer 120 miles away. He says, "David, I don't know whether we can do it, but here's the phone number of the corn planter engineer, and if he makes it work, we'll sell it to you." We worked 4 months on this, and it happened. So here's our white planter. We're planting 2 species of crops without too much trouble. What we found was that the soybean plate would actually plant winter peas, cowpeas, sun hemp, anything that looked like a soybean. That's 120. As you can see, electronics is not my bailiwick, you know.
Put it on your belt and stuff.
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Thanks.
All right. We're wired up and ready to go. Our second plate's a sugar beet plate. It's a 45 cell plate. Winter peas are about 4,000 seeds per pound. Radishes are about 36,000 seeds per pound. What we're trying to do is mimic planting corn. So we're planting radish seeds every 4.5 inches away. Here's what the field looks like. 1 row of radishes, 1 row of winter peas. What we wanted was these tubers. We wanted them 3.5 to 4 inches apart, growing in the soil. These become our storage tanks for nutrients. They're picking elements out of the soil, bringing them up and storing them in this plant. You know. What we found was, if you remember, you saw the winter pea with the nodulation and the root. You saw that amount of nitrogen being fixed. What we found when we put a radish 15 inches away from it, it produced more nodulation. It produced 25% more nodulation when the radish was beside it. What did we see from the radish? Putting the radishes 15 inches away from a nitrogen fixing plant, the radish got 20% bigger, 20% deeper. The tuber was right from there to there, that's 22 inches deep. The tap root's another 36 inches deep in the soil. Guess what that does for drainage? Men and women, you know, that really helps. As the radish root grows, it tends to lift the soil. It'll lift our soil 3 to 5 inches. It looks like this in the spring. Guess what? I was really thrilled. It all winter killed. When I have a field that looks like this, I don't have to use a burned down herbicide. Probably don't have to use any herbicide to start with. We just plant. We leave the window open enough. If we get weeds, we can come back in and use a post spray on it. Sometimes we don't even have to use a post spray. You know. After trial and error, we found out we wanted to plant on the radish row. It mainly is because where this radish row is, the soil's looser than over here where the peas were. What we found out was the soil was 2 degrees warmer because it had done a little tillage. It was 2% drier because the radish pulled the moisture away. And there was no moisture pulled away from where the winter peas were. We never found a seed too deep in a radish hole because our fluted coulter collapsed the soil around it and filled it before the seed disc run over it. You know. Here's the corn coming up. This is planted May the 5th. This is May the 12th. And we're almost in the second leaf stage right now. This is a radish carcass. We operate a farmer's market. We're always looking at things to do, to be innovative. That carcass is hard like a loofah sponge. It's real light. The wind, the water goes through it. I went to the hardware store and brought 20 dowel rods 4 foot long, cut them in half. Give them to my wife. I said, go out there and pick them things up. We'll put a dowel rod in there and we'll make a loofah sponge back scratcher and sell them at the farmer's market. The dowel rods are still in the shop, guys. You know, that didn't happen. But what I wanted to show you was we didn't plant on the reddish row here. We missed it because we didn't have guidance. I'm hoping we solve that problem this year. But where we didn't miss a row, look how the reddish lifts the soil. How much water will that take in? In 1971, when we started farming, we had rainfall events that lasted all day long, and we got an inch of rain. You know, it was one of them deals where you was outside and your shirt was always damp and the corn was sucking in the water. In 2015, we get 5.5 inches of rain in 40 minutes and then no more for a month. You know, I guess the climate's changed. I don't know. We're sure having different types of weather. But just imagine when we get those kind of rainfall events and the water can hit these and run in here, how much better we can do. We also want to show you the armor we still have left from our wheat stubble. You know, there's a field, October the 2nd. I really feel good when I'm shelling corn and cutting dusty beans and get done and go down the road to the next field and I find a green field in between. You know, just kind of revives your hope. You're knowing that you're building soil, helping the soil health, keeping down erosion, reducing your inputs. You know. What did we find after a 5-year study with The Ohio State University? This is the nutrients they found the day we plant corn when we send them to soil. We've changed this policy. We send the soil now 2 weeks before we plant so we know what we need to put on. You know, on Dave Brant's farm, I think we have enough nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash there to grow 200 bushel corn without buying commercial fertilizer. This don't happen the first year or two. This is what you have to get into to find out what's going on. You know, and it's really tough for David to not use herbicides and not use fertilizer because we've been taught to do that. You know, it's like Gabe Brown told me, he says you need to throw that binky away and quit doing it. You know. So 4 years ago I learned to listen to Gabe, and now we're not using much nutrients at all where we have these covers. This just happened to be a waterway. 2 different types of covers that we're looking at presently. This cover over here, this is an 8-way cover that is more a cool season cover. We'll talk about that a little bit later. There's 12-way species here, and this is a warm season cover. So you can see how in October when we had some frost, the warm season things like Sudan sorghum and pearl millet has started and went through and they're dying. But we still have green underneath here coming on. We're trying to make these cover crops mimic the woodlot. We're trying to mimic Mother Nature. You know. I was at a meeting like this 7 years ago. Nice colored fellow stood up from Africa and he was talking about what he did in Africa. And he showed this plant, which is right here. Right there, that one right there. That's called a sun hemp. You know. Next picture he showed the roots. The plant was 25 foot tall. He showed the roots. He had nodulation on them things as big as tennis balls. Like 6 or 8 of them hanging on one root plant. You know, David saw that. I said, man, I got to have that stuff. So after the meeting I went to see him and I said, can you give me some of those seeds? And he said, yeah. He says, I'll give you a bag. I thought, man, that's okay. You know. So he took my name and address and he says, you'll just have to pay the freight charge. I said, that won't be bad. That had to be all right. You know. Wasn't thinking. So anyhow, about 4 months later, a UPS truck comes running up the driveway and he dumps out this 50-pound bag of stuff and he says, COD, you owe me $427.60. You know, and I thought, wow. Saw what it was. I thought, well, you know, I sure made a mistake here, but I'll pay for it. So then we had enough for about 5 acres. So we put it in our precision planter because it looked like a soybean, a little bigger. So we got radishes and soybeans growing, and you know, it was doing fine. And this is a September picture. You know, come August, we go by the farm and look at it, but every time we go by the farm, the deputy sheriff and state patrol will be either sitting there or going by. You know, and I couldn't figure it out. So finally one day I was out there digging and looking at the roots, and all of a sudden, here comes 2 state patrols, a deputy sheriff, and a helicopter. You know? And the deputy sheriff gets out and he says, "Who are you?" And I says, "I'm Dave Brant and I rent this farm." And he says, "What are you doing?" And I says, "I'm growing cover crops. Look here. Look at these roots. Look at the nodulation." He says, "I don't care, son." He says, "Are you smoking them leaves?" And I looked at him and I says, "Could I do that?" And he figured he really had a clodbuster, you know. And I says, "Well, no, I didn't know anything about that." But I says, "We're trying to build soil health. We're trying not to spend money for nitrogen." Well, he says, "Isn't this a marijuana plant?" I says, "I don't think so." You know, I was really playing it pretty cool. And so things went along and they agreed it was okay, you know. They had never seen it before. And it grows pretty well till it gets about 34 degrees, and then look what happens to it. So I don't need a herbicide, you know, don't need a herbicide to take it out. Look how green those radishes are. Picked up a lot of nitrogen from that sun hemp, you know. Here's another David Brant disaster. Faba beans, put them between the rows. Thought it was a warm season legume, thought it would work real well. They didn't grow very well, didn't get hot enough that year, you know. But what I wanted to show you was right there, there's a radish. That thing is 6 inches across, out of the ground 18 inches deep. Man, I said, that's terrible, there ain't no roots. So I get the shovel out, and that's when I don't have a motor, you know. So I dig this thing out. At 12 inches deep, we had a hard pan. So I was real careful, dug through the hard pan. Guess what? Taproot went through the hard pan. Below the hard pan, we found a 3-inch diameter tuber 11 inches more deep. Then the root went on, you know. So I guess at Dave Brant University Farm, I figure these things have to get enough weight to push that taproot through the hard pan. That's why they jump out of the ground. Because they always are at our place, up in the air. We're like crimson clover with hairy vetch, with rye. A great thing, great pasture crop. A great thing if you need emergency hay sources, great things if you need emergency pasture, you know. We check compaction with a compaction probe. You know, here was our results. This is 5 years of no-till with 1 year of cover crop. This is 5 years of no-till with no cover. At 15 inches deep, it took about 110 pounds of pressure where the cover crop was. At 15 inches deep where there was no cover, it took 200 pounds of pressure. I assume that that meant my cover crop loosened the soil better than 50%. You know. How do we check for nitrogen? We use what they call a chlorophyll meter or a SPAD meter, which is the same as what we're reading about today as a green seeker. Put on your sprayers, put on your nitrogen applicators. It's looking at the color of the leaf. We've used this for 20 years. On our farm, if that reads 42 parts per million, we have enough nitrogen in that corn plant to produce 200 bushel corn. Here you see we have excess of that. If it says 40 parts per million, David's putting about 15 pounds of nitrogen on, because I know it needs some. We never jeopardize a crop just because of not having enough nutrients. We'll put it on if we need it. We can produce pretty decent corn on our clay soils. As you can see, we got corn behind there. If you look in the forefront, there's next year's corn crop with the peas and radishes and 50 pounds of nitrogen. I like this test because it's really economical and fast. This is called a Savita test. You have this flag right here. You poke this flag in the ground to right there. You take this jar. turn it upside down so it's 1.5 inches deep in the soil. Make sure you put a flag where you put it. The first 2 years I just went out in a big old cornfield and shoved it in the ground. The next morning I couldn't remember where it was at. So you have to make sure you can identify where you put it. You take the cap off or the jar off. You read the flag. This flag was about 3. It says on the back if it's 3 or higher on a number, it needs no additional nitrogen. What this does, it checks carbon dioxide leaving the soil, which is in direct correlation to the amount of nitrogen in the soil. I think it works real well. It's a $7 thing. We know what's going on. We introduced covers with drills. This happened to be a wore-out hayfield, so we're putting 2 pounds of reddish in here to loosen up some compaction. So we're getting ready to plant corn. We have a high-boy cedar that we made. This is up in Lake Erie area, around Lake Erie. They grow carrots up there. I went up to see this machine. This guy helped us design ours and build it. And they had just dug the carrots the day before. This is November the 27th, and here they're sowing ryegrass. We was back up there December the 5th, and it was green in color. Ryegrass was about 1 inch tall, even though the ground was freezing. You know, couldn't believe the ryegrass grew that well. You can see it's got lots of hoses. This one happens to be 120 foot, so there's 45 drops on it. Ours has 39 because we're a 90 footer. Here's how the seed comes out. It's distributed. We can go through standing corn. We can go through standing beans, up to 12 foot tall. We've tried helicopters. We've not been very successful with a helicopter. We've tried airplanes. In the 80s, we tried planes. The problem was they'd never done it before, and 92% of the seed ended up on the neighbor. You know, today's airplane pilots are a lot better. They're learning how to do it. You know. So about 90% of it's on the farm now instead of only 10%, you know. Here's what we want to see. We want to see cover crops growing in standing crops. When we can get this much growth and we're shelling corn, our combine tells us it takes 2 gallons less an hour diesel fuel where we have cover crop versus where there's no cover crop in the field. The combine rolls that much easier over that cover. Another way to save a couple bucks per acre. Again, there's hairy vetch and there's crimson clover. There's rye. Those kind of things there. We need to understand as we're going to no-till that you need to spread the residue. This happened to be a 40-foot draper header. This is 42 inches of soybean residue. My neighbor's farm, guess what? It's been 3 years ago and he's still got a 42-inch band there that don't grow a crop. Why he did it, I don't know. Evidently the chopper belt broke or the hydraulic motor quit and he threw the chopper on the ground and kept on going. If we're going to no-till, you must spread that residue evenly across there. It can be done. It takes some adjustment. Work with your dealers. This is our machine. This actually is throwing this residue 45 foot coming out of the rear end of this machine. And straw is probably the hardest thing to throw because the wind will tend to blow it the opposite direction, you know. Want to make sure that we evenly disperse the residue out of corn. This is 250 bushel corn. Look how even the residue is spread. No problem with drills or planter going through this. You know. We're going to switch a little bit and talk about blended species, and I'm really liking blended species much better than dual species. We're seeing the soils change much faster. We can take a wore-out farm and make it highly productive in 2 years. Where when we was doing single species and double species, it may take 7 or 8.
As you can see at the bottom of the picture, you may not see it, the first blend is 16,000 pounds of biomass, 14,000, 11,000, 11,000. If we can get these pounds of biomass produced as of November, we can change the organic matter of the soil by as much as 0.5%. Can you imagine 0.5% organic matter changes means you can hold 1/3 more water than what you started with? 15% more nutrients will be released. Here's what they look like. You know, we got some sun hemp, we got some sunflowers, we got soybeans, we got radishes, we got turnips, got Ethiopian cabbage, hairy vetch, crimson clover, and it's a beautiful field. This is 8/22, this is planted 20 days ahead of this. This is planted on 8/1, August 1, and it's 20 inches tall already. Here it is in October. I should not be in this picture. I should have at least 60 cows per acre eating on this and mob grazing them. You know. This is our biggest field. This is our 55-acre field. If you want to know how many we have 100 fields in our operation. We have 27 fields that's under 5 acres. But what we got here, we got cover crop, we got a 10-way species, an 8-way species, a 12-way species, a 13-way species, and we're seeing which one does the best because we plant a corn across it. These are all about 500 foot wide. Let the yield monitor tell us which cover crop is doing the best for us. Which one produces the most nutrients. We used to not use sunflowers. We started using sunflowers 4 years ago. Why? If you can visualize that field without those sunflowers, and in our area they're paying $300 an acre cash rent, driving up and down the road, talking to all the landlords. When David plants their farm to wheat and we put this cover crop in, they go to the landlord and they say, look at the damn weeds Mr. Brant has. If you let us farm that, we won't have that for you. You know? We had landlords call us. They said, what are you doing, David? You got all those weeds. I said, those are not weeds. Those are cover crops. Well, what's that? So you have to explain it to them. So 4 years ago, we put sunflowers. That's a pound of sunflowers. Guess what happened, guys? We got a lot of 80 and 90-year landlords, lady landlords that live by themselves. They go out and they pick 4 or 5 of them, put them in a vase, put them on their dining room table. They're thrilled to death. You know, greatest thing that ever happened. They talk to the next landlord, we're not farming. Guess what? We get to farm that one in a year or two. You know, just because we can put sunflowers. Interesting thing, after the 4 or 5 years that we've done this, what do we see in our soil sample? We're zinc deficient in Ohio for corn. Every time we had to put 5 pounds of zinc with our fertilizer because we're zinc deficient. When we put a pound of sunflowers like this in, our zinc levels came up. So we no longer have to buy zinc. That's a $14 an acre savings to me. We're starting to save some money. Look how nice and green they are. This is September the 16th. People love to see these fields green, especially in the fall. If you look back behind there, this is a woodlot. You notice all the trees aren't the same size. What we're doing is mimicking our woodlot. We have tall stuff and short stuff. We have intermediate stuff. We have roots from 2 inches deep to 6 foot deep in this field. That's how we build biomass. That's how we build soil health. This is a pearl millet. Jay will talk about this because that's what they grow out there. This is a western plant. Not supposed to grow east of the Mississippi. Guess what it does? It does. It don't go to seed. Puts that seed head on. You know, here it looks like a cattail. Got 4 grandkids. They like to come to the farm. We get them to collect 5 of these, put 2 sunflowers and a red ribbon around it. That's $7 at the farmer's market. They sell 200 bunches every Saturday. Grandkids like to come to Grandpa's. You know. This is an 8-way mix of clovers, legumes. We're trying to build legumes. Trying to build these where we have lots of wheat straw. Trying to get our nitrogen to calcium levels back to where we want them. This is Ray Archuleta's blend. This was planted on August 1st. This is September the 10th. Dave Brant's not scared of cover, but I was scared of this one. I mean, my dog got in there and got lost. I had to go find him. He's crying and couldn't get his way out of there. You know. 24,000 pounds of biomass in that blend. Changed the organic matter 1 percentage point on the field that was in 1 year. Here's our blends again. Here's our blends after corn harvest. We take soil samples after corn harvest to see what's left, so we know what we need to put on for soybeans. What we're trying to show you over here, guys, is we had from 191 to $126 worth of nutrients found in these blends, and most of the blends were over $200 worth of P and K for next year's soybeans. What that proved to me was that our cover crops are not just fixing it for 1 year, they're fixing nutrients for 2 and 3 years down the road. This is the corn yields we had from those blends. There's our peas and radishes. The blue bar is 100% fertilizer. The orange bar is half, and the green bar is 0. So you can see as we change species from 2 to 10 to 8 to 7, our yields went up without nutrients at 174 bushel. This was in September of 2012, and our annual rainfall in September was 8.8 inches of rain for the year in Ohio. The driest year we ever seen. What do we find as far as nutrients in the grain? And this is the next thing we're working on to prove that we have better quality grain than a conventional farmer. No fertilizer, we had 9% grain. Half-rate fertilizer, we had 8. With fertilizer, we had 7. My neighbor's conventional corn was 5.6. We are building nutrient value. How we're going to feed the world? We're going to feed the world by not increasing the yield, but by increasing the nutrient density of our grains. This is a radish. We talk about radish fumigating the soil. It gives off a sulfur odor. The slugs like the outside of the radish because it's sweet. There's where the slugs ate it. There lays the slugs. 24 hours after they eat the radish, they get a edema in the gut that kills them. We can suppress the slugs with radishes. We also can fumigate the soil when it decomposes. There's slug eggs, right there, slug eggs. These are viable eggs. 2 days later, they're black because the sulfur in the soil has killed the egg, so they will not produce new slugs on our farm. We roll 90% of our crops. As we roll the crops, we can reduce our herbicides. You can see how nice it looks. That happened to be sorghum Sudan grass that we rolled in September to plant wheat into. We was doing this early. We rolled our garden rye. When we plant most of our garden with cover crops. Just take a little spade or a screwdriver, put the tomatoes in. You know. Ryegrass and crimson clover. I like ryegrass because it's deep-rooted. The problem David has with it is it gets too big and I can't kill it. If it goes to the reproduction stage or where it's lengthening out the length of the leaf, it's hard to kill. If you can get it in that 6-inch stage, it kills fairly easy. We have to let it grow to grow out the moisture. So we don't use much ryegrass in our mixes. It plants well. Takes less horsepower to pull it. There's no dust. Everything stays nice and green. nice and clean. Here's our big blends. What we're doing is showing you that we're mimicking Mother Nature. Remember the oak trees, the maple trees lost their leaves. The pines underneath there are still green. So this is our maple trees, the sunflowers, the pearl millet. Underneath here is our pine trees, our peas, our radishes. We have green growing cover 330 days a year. The other 36 days it's either froze or got snow on it, you know. Again, another shot of it. This is Ethiopian cabbage. In our area, Ethiopian cabbage grows all winter. A very deep-rooted plant. Here's what our 12-way blends look like. We like to have our cover crops fall over like this. They're not flat on the ground. It's probably a foot between here and the ground. What we see is the sunlight and the wind can get in there. That creates a channel that the wind goes underneath the cover and dries out the soil in the spring. You know. Another ideas. Always looking for new ideas. An FFA student told me, David, why don't we plant soybeans with corn? They're nitrogen fixers. Had to give that man a good handshake. I never thought about it. So we started planting corn with soybeans where we didn't have cover crop. You know, put them right together. Both of them Roundup ready. Ray Archuleta's looking at it. He's saying there's not enough diversity. Not enough diversity. Not enough stuff growing. Well, Ray, here's the results. These 4 varieties of corn had soybeans. Moved down 16 rows from here, planted the same 4 varieties in the same field, put 190, 140 pounds of nitrogen on it. Should have had more yield, guys. We averaged almost 200 up here. Here we averaged 125. Sold David to plant soybeans with corn. Pick up a little nitrogen, you know. Got guys that I found in Pennsylvania planting cover crop and corn together, putting it in a silo. A ton and a half more silage per acre. 2 or 3 points more protein in their silage, more milk. I guess they get along real well with it, you know. Different things we can think about. Oats work well. Brassicas work well. This was a Pennsylvania soils pit. I really like this. This is Joe Myers. What he did, he had a water infiltration can here. We put 44 liters of water in there with a spoonful of white paint. In less than a minute and a half, that white paint went through the profile 42 inches deep. You could see it. That was really eye-opening to me, you know. But look how that has perforated the soils. Infiltration. There's our big blend. Can we get corn without fertilizer? Yes, we can, you know. Again, another one. Another one. The last one. I was concerned about this in 2007. I was in Texas. I was getting ready to take off, and guess what? They had a dust storm, you know. So I found this information when I come home, and here it says in Ohio, we lose 1.5 ton of soil from wind. We lose 6.8 ton from water. That's a total 8.3 ton. That's a cost to our farms per acre, per year, of $330 worth of nutrients being left from erosion and from wind erosion. The problem I run into is when we went over here to Texas, you know, and they were losing 12 ton to wind erosion. That day that I was in Texas, there was a lady on the interstate got killed because 2 semis run into her in a dust storm. I felt bad because I didn't get those farmers convinced to sow some cover crop to keep that dust from blowing, you know. This is our fun planter. This is an AC unit that we plant our garden stuff with. I call this my precision planter. You know, precision planters got these 2020 units with airbags, weight transfer, hydraulic cylinders everywhere. Well, this one's really good because what we got here, we got a nice seat. We got a 250-pound weight right above the fluted coulter. We got a seed tube with a funnel. We got a red mark on that tire. He's got pumpkin seeds in this hand. When he sees the red marks, we put 2 seeds. It goes down there. If we can't get the fluted coulter deep enough, we put the 400-pound transfer weight right there. You know? The first year we didn't have air conditioning. This year we give air conditioning to the guy. You know, and we're off and running. You know? Works real well. We're planting pumpkins here. Here they are, guys, gals. 7 acres of pumpkins. You know? Can't tell you how much fun this is. I learned a lesson about selling pumpkins. If you'll notice, there's corn right there. The road's right behind that corn, so there's 8 rows of corn so they can't see the pumpkins. There's a gate right up here. The first year I had bought new blue jeans and set on a bale of straw to collect the money. Didn't work very well. Didn't sell very many pumpkins. The second year I had a pair that had the knees wore out on it. Looked pretty bad. Had an old straw hat. Sold all the pumpkins. You know? I guess it's a mindset. They just need to see an old wore out farmer to help him out. You know? But what we found out was our white pumpkin right there, that's a $37.50 one. The orange are only worth $17. You know, they seem to like white pumpkins better, guys. Something unusual. I can't tell you how much money we had there, but we had enough money to go out to eat twice, at least. You know. To finish up, I just want to tell you we need to mimic Mother Nature. We need to change what's between our ears so that we can think outside the norm. I'm really afraid as a producer that we're in this rut for the next 4 or 5 years. For the last 3 years we've been flying pretty high at $8 corn and $12 beans. I think those times are over for a while, fellas and gals. We're going to have to learn to readjust and do things. So we got to mimic Mother Nature. We got to manage and watch the details. As you take and go from conventional tillage to no-till, you'll have more time to visit the field. Don't go to the coffee shop or the beer joint. Go to the field with your shovel. See how that soil's changing. For Christ's sakes, don't do it that 50-mile-an-hour windshield check. That don't work. And we will be profitable. Again, I want to thank you for inviting me here. Our field day on our farm is April the 6th. You're always welcome. We're only 6 hours west of here. And we'd like to have you all come and learn how we have done some things with cover crops on our farm. If we have any questions, I'll try to answer them. I've totally confused everybody.
I'm sure someone's got a question for Dave. I will mention, Dave has to take off a little bit early today, so we better get the questions in now. We have a little time. This is the time. Well, we have a mic coming, so you can...
Dave, you had said that your organic matter is around 8% now. Is that your home farm across the board? That's our home farm. We had 160 acres. It's 8% right now. We have 100 acres that we just rented. The organic matter is 0.25. We have 300 acres that we've had under a no-till and cover crop situation for 4 years. It is now at 3% organic matter. Our 10-year-old farms are at 5%. So we are gaining. The Ohio State University has a real fit because they say we can't do that. So they're now starting to look at this, and we have right now we have lots of university help proving that we are doing it the right way, you know. But it's just hard for those professors to understand we can change the soil and the dynamics of the soil so fast with a blended cover crop. Boy, I really confused them, didn't I?
Dave,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit about what convinced you to
Well, I think as we looked at our cover crops and began to thinking about how we could make them work, and how that the biomass was so much greater as they got bigger. And, it was an accident that we really started rolling because, when stuff was 6 foot tall, we began to wonder how to get through it, So we began to roll so we could see where to go. And then we saw that as we rolled it, it actually died, which actually kept us from using one herbicide pass. This year we had 412 acres of soybeans with rye in it that we rolled, and none of that 400 acres had a chemical this year. And our average bean yield was 79 bushel per acre off of that 425 acres of beans. Yes, sir. Do I use seed treatments? I have up till 2016, mainly because my seed supplier told me he couldn't do anything but give me treatments. I sat down with him last week. He was going to deliver corn to me this week, and I looked and I saw that the seed corn treatment that he was going to give me was $62 a unit. The treatment on the soybeans was going to be $17 a unit. On the corn and beans that we plant, that was going to equal $7,200 just in seed treatment. I told him I didn't want any treated seed, and he said he couldn't do business with me, and I said, thanks, I'll find somebody that will. At present, we have bought untreated seed. And we have tried untreated seed a year ago in a small plot, and untreated seed out-yielded treated seeds by 7 or 8 bushels to the acre. I think in a long-term no-till situation where you're using cover crops and we have all these beneficial insects and organisms in the soil, that we don't need to have this seed treater anymore, I don't think you can do it the first year into no-till and first year with covers, but if you're 3 or 4 years into cover, I think it's time to look at that. We dropped our fungicide and insecticide 7 years ago. All but on 6 acres. We treat 6 acres of corn and 6 acres of beans every year with fungicide, mainly to make my agronomist go nuts. But he has not showed me a yield increase in 7 years by including a fungicide or insecticide put on. But I don't want to miss the opportunity. If it's going to give us a yield plus, I want to see it. And we don't see it with our cover crop fields. I think the only reason we see it in conventional fields is most of all the conventional soils that we are running today are bacteria driven, which means they need bought nutrients and bought protection because there's no insects, beneficial insects in the soil to help them. Yes, I saw another hand.
Yeah, you find a problem running combine through soybeans that's got cover crop, just from a harvesting problems?
Do we have a problem with that? A year ago we did, mainly because we did a whole lot of high boy seeding. The beans were just starting to drop leaves. Then we got a rain event. The beans regrew, reflowered. The rye kept growing. By the time the beans dried out, the rye was 11 inches tall. We were taking 9 inches of that and putting it through the combine, and that was a bear. So we learned to back that seeding date up. I don't want to see any of our covers more than 3 or 4 inches tall to cut beans with, It can be a problem. I won't, I'll tell you that up front. It can be a problem, but I think it's one of those problems you can manage, Yes, sir.
We continuously graze with cattle, and we alternate warm and cool season cover crops. How can I go to mixtures and continue to alternate
I think in that case, I assume you're not mixing the warm and cool together. You're doing it 2 different times. I think sometimes we can look at using warm season grasses with some cool season mixes in there. And if you're mob grazing them and only taking half of them away, you can take the early warm season stuff out early in the summer. The first shot, take them off for 35 or 40 days. The cool season stuff will come up because more than likely the frost or the cool weather will nip the warm season grasses and legumes you put in that, and then the cool season stuff will come up and be with it. I think those are ways we can entice the cattle to have more cover in the winter. And I think Jay's going to talk more about that this afternoon or today sometime.
I tell you, you don't get lunch, you don't ask questions. Somebody else out there has a question, but I'll ask one while you think of it. Can you talk a little bit about some of the things we have concerns with as growers with covers or moisture management? Now you talk about you have damp soils, we have some wet soils, we have some pretty shaly, droughty soils. What's your decision-making process like to let that cover go or to terminate?
First, we're going to talk about the wet side of it, and then we'll go to the dry. In the spring, you'll have to visualize our soils without tile, Cardington clay-based soils. So our water table is about 2.5 inches taller than the soil profile is, So what we do with the rye as we're going out in the field, and I mean we go daily, maybe we'll go twice a day. If that rye, if it's 60 degrees and that rye is really growing, and we go out and we take a shovel full of soil, I make what I'm going to call a ball of soil, and when I open up my hands, if it falls apart, the corn planter's coming out. It looks wet, but it's not too wet. If it stays in that ball, maybe I'll check it at the nighttime or in the evening, If it falls apart in the evening, I'll start in the evening. If it don't, I'll start the next morning, And I think you have to do the same thing with dry weather. If you have sandy soils that tend to dry out quick, go down with a shovel, evaluate what you got, and if it's big and it's growing fast, sucking it out, burn it off a day or 2 or 3 beforehand. Our biggest problem in Ohio is that when our weatherman says it's going to be fair and dry for 10 days, and you got this rye really growing and the soil's starting to get dry, and you say, man, I got to burn it off so it's 4 foot tall, and you layer down with a herbicide. That night it rains 2.5 inches. We end up with the biggest bowl of jelly mud you ever seen, and we plant wheat in the fall because it never dries out. Once you kill that green cover, it's like stretching a tarp across that ground, and the sunlight and wind can't dry it out. So if you don't have underground drainage to take it away, it's going to stay wetter. So in our case, with our wetter soils, we always like to see it green. If you have sandy type soils around the river bottom, you're just going to have to spend more time out there and look at it and see what you want to do. It may be a thing that you're planting in that when it's only 6 or 7 inches tall and killing it,
How long a season corn or beans are you trying to plant with the cover crop plan?
Used to be we were in that 112 day length stuff till 3 years ago. Now 25% of our varieties, both corn and beans, are early maturing. Mainly so we can get started and get some cover crops in. Seems to work real well. We have a lot of producers we're working with. We have a 10,000 acre farmer. He has 6,000 acres of corn a year. In his outside 32 rows of corn in every field, he has 85-day corn. Has 120-day corn inside the field. What that does, that lets him to shell his outside rows of this cornfields the first week of September. Gives him a chance to get his combine adjusted, things going on, the dryer started, and allows us to go in then and blow in cover crop seeds and not mash down the rows on the turn-ins. And he's real happy with that, you know, because that other corn's still green. He's cutting beans. He's got 4,000 acres of beans to cut. So that rye's probably 4 or 5 inches tall when he gets back to shell corn, you know. So those are some ideas and some things you can do to make this work to your advantage to get cover crops out there.
Do you use oats in your cover crop?
We'll use oats if we're going to pasture. I really like oats for pasture. I don't like oats for cover crop where we're not going to pasture it, because oats tend to fall over and get tight against the soil. You know, when an oat falls down, it just falls flat down against the soil. If they get really big, I've seen oats that will actually got seed heads on them. And if it's 30-pound oats and they fall over, it's hard to get the wind and sunlight to dry that out in the spring, because they will be dead in the spring. So I like to have other cover crops with the oats to help hold them up a little bit so that the wind can get under there and dry the soils out.
Where's your place at in Ohio? You go out that way.
Okay, I'm southeast of Columbus, about 20 miles on Route 33. We're 17 miles off Interstate 70 south, so it's not too hard to get to us. And like I say, you're always welcome. If you can't make it to a field day and you're going to somewhere to Columbus or something else during the year, we'll definitely take time and show you what we're doing if you just stop in and see us, you know. Yes?
I'm asking all the questions. So your white planter with the 15-inch interplants, do the interplants drive on a different gear system, or are they a separate rate, like when you're seeding rye and radishes, or how does that all work?
Our white planter has all one main drive shaft, and we adjust the seeding rates by the number of holes in the seeding plates. We can change sprockets if we need to, but we found it's a lot easier just to change the number of cells to the plate, you know, and it works real well. What's our soil textures like? We're in the glaciated part of Ohio. We're kind of in the, just starting into the foothills. Most of our soils will have a 5 to 6 inch topsoil, about anywhere between 24 to 48 inches of subsoil, and then bedrock underneath that on the side of the hills. And if it's flat land, it's usually 20 inches of subsoil and then sand and gravel under that. You know, if that helps. Yes?
Do you use that same white planter to plant wheat too, then 15 strips?
Yes, sir. Yeah, and what we've done, you know, we also have the Kraus drill, and my wife likes to run the drill. She doesn't like to run the corn planter because it's electronic, and if you don't set in the seat just right as a tractor, the electronics don't work, you know. It's a problem. I mean, you know, all that stuff's good as long as it works, but when it don't work, it's a bear. But anyhow, if we can run both of them, and we're planting wheat, we're at 943,000 seeds with the white planter. If she's running a drill, we're at 1.2 million seeds. For 5 years, we've run them side by side, same variety of wheat, same herbicide, fertilizer programs, and maybe 1 year the wheat will be 1 bushel better where the drill is. The next year where it's in 15-inch rows, it may be a bushel and a half. I see no difference between 15-inch wheat and 7.5-inch wheat, other than in the spring you may have a little more broadleaf problems from the 15-inch wheat. The thing I do see with 15-inch wheat out of a planter, everything is more uniform. You know, the drill's a mechanized spillage. It tends to have more difference in depth. It's hard to keep that drill uniform depth. Where the corn planter, if you set her at 1.5 inches, it's there, and everything comes up, the tiller's the same, and I think that's the benefit of the planter, you know. And we see the same thing with beans. You know, we may see a 1.5 bushel yield increase over our 15-inch beans versus drilled, but sometimes you get pushed and you got to use them both. You know.
Do you have other employees, or is your wife do all the work?
Well, Mother does a majority of the work. In the harvest time, we may have one part-time person come for 3 or 4 hours. You know, we're really lucky. We're pretty automated. At fall time, I'll run the combine and she'll unload the wagons, you know, into the dryer, goes from there. When she's not unloading corn, she's planting wheat or rye. You know, I mean, you can see I don't work real hard.
Do you use a different cover strategy between your deeper soils and your shallower soils, or kind of have more of a uniform approach?
Well, I just kind of use a more uniform approach. I want lots of diversity. I don't care whether it's thin soils or dark soils. The thing we have to watch with our thin soils is, especially if you're just starting into it, you may have to use just a little bit of nutrients to help it to start grow. If it's darker soils, we've never had to add anything because the organic matter's higher. You got more nutrients to work with. You know, as you're going into cover crops, don't forget if the soils wore out, you still may have to fertilize them the first year to get them to really respond. You know, not a whole lot of fertilizer, but you know, 25 to 50 pounds of fertilizer on a cover crop might make a world of difference on how it works. You know, after that, you probably never need to use any more nutrients. You know.
I have one more question. So you've come to this conclusion over time that you can reduce nutrients usage based on your improved organic matter soil health. How much plot work a year do you do to show that one field where you, on your own,
How much?
put these things out?
How much plot work do we do? Every field we have plot work in. Because every field will, you know, if it's a cornfield, so many rows in that cornfield will have no fertilizer, no nitrogen. So many rows in that field will have some nitrogen. If it's a long-term no-till field, it gets no more fertilizer. I don't want to slip up and make a mistake and say that I didn't need fertilizer, you know. So if the fertilizer stuff does a little better, I know what to do next year. We're always a year in arrears on our decisions, you know. But I will not jeopardize the crop. If our corn is yellow and it needs nitrogen, and I've had a reading on my test that we use that says we should have plenty, I'm going to put some on. I am not going to run the risk of not having a crop. I do not carry crop insurance. We, in the 40 years that we've been farming under cover crops, we have never had a crop that would trigger payment under crop insurance. I carried crop insurance in the 80s for 3 years because it was mandated by ASCS. In order to be in the program, you had to do it. And at that point, we were spending about $9,000 to $10,000 a year for crop insurance. I paid it 3 years. And I thought, God, this ain't doing me nothing. I can't go out to eat because my crop insurance payment's taking all my money. You know? So I quit paying it. I went to the bank and I says, I'm not paying crop insurance. I'll sell enough forward contracted corn so that you'll cover it on my operating note. And I'm just not going to do it, guys. So I have no trouble that way. But if you're in a good cover crop program, I think we can deter some of that loss. You know, I'm probably the wrong guy to talk about cover crop or crop insurance because I think crop insurance makes me lazy. You know, crop insurance is like glyphosate or Roundup. It made me lazy. 15 years ago, I knew every herbicide. I knew how long the residual effect was. Today I know about glyphosate, Roundup, because it's easy, you know. I think that's some of the problem. It's easier to say, well, I got a crop loss, do I need to do anything about it? No, I get paid, I'll just go to Florida, take my losses and go, you know. If you don't have something there, you'll figure out something to grow, you know. If we have a corn loss, you know, if hail comes or something comes and it ruins the crop when it's 3 foot tall, guess what, guys? It's going to go to sorghum, it's going to go to buckwheat, it's going to go to something that I get some money out of, you know. Mainly because we don't have that protection. Yes?
How do you get your yield data?
Yield data comes through the yield monitor. Through the yield monitor. Best thing that ever happened. And I don't think there's probably not a combine in here today that don't have yield monitors on them. And I don't care. I really don't care whether they're right or wrong. Because if you're doing comparison in the same field, you know, if my yield monitor is reading 500 bushel, I know that's wrong. But it's 500 bushel in this pass where I got all the nitrogen on, and it's 510 bushel where I don't have anything. It's in a relationship, you know. I know our yield monitors are a lot closer than that, but I'm just saying so many guys don't calibrate them. But you can still tell whether what you did at that practice changed your ideas, you know. Yes?
David, you mentioned a livestock component. Have you done any livestock work in cover crops and then measured the difference in those particular fields?
We have not done any livestock work. We have done a lot of livestock work in North Carolina, Cincinnati, those kind of areas. 25 years ago, I ripped out all the fences, you know. Presently considering, when you know people like Gabe Brown and Gail Fuller and a few others that's been on our farm, and they say, what's missing out of your farm is livestock. And we had a big field day a year ago, and Gabe was there, and Gail Fuller was there, and the fellow from Missouri, Doug Peterson's a great grazer. And they were sitting around the table after the field day, and they said, David, how much money are you losing not having cattle? I says, I don't know. Well, you know, Gabe come up with this figure. You should have 450 stalkers on 160 acres for 72 days. And he says, if they gain 4 pounds a day, you're throwing away $82,000. He almost convinced me to go build a fence, you know. My son's coming back in the operation probably within the next 6 months, and I think that'll be his decision to do. I chased enough cattle when I was a teenager and early in my life that I don't want to do it again, you know. But I think there's a place for cattle, yes. Yes, or something that would eat some of the cover. And to me, I think the ideal thing would be to have a manure pie, whether it was from a cow or a horse or goat or sheep or whatever, and a urine pie and a cow pie touching each other. To me, that would be ideal. Whether we can accomplish that or not, I don't know, but they say they can, you know.
All right, that's it. Are there any other questions? Last chance. Once, twice, okay.
I thank you all very much.
Yeah, we have a big hand for this.